But tonight, as we continue our study, we're going to be in chapter 13. We've talked about last week about David and Bathsheba. At the very beginning of 2 Samuel shows how David became the king of the unified nation of Israel. A few chapters later, we see just how God blessed him as he advanced the territory. He was, at that time, the most powerful in terms of land, in terms of wealth, in terms of client kingdoms, those that paid taxes to David. But in chapters 11 and 12, we see how David messes up. And how does he mess up in those two chapters? Has an affair with Bathsheba and kills her husband, who is? Uriah. Does he only kill Uriah? No, he kills everybody in Uriah's unit, basically, right? And so we see in chapters 13 through about chapter 18 or 20 about just how things start to fall apart around David. And the writer of 2 Samuel links that to his failure there in 2 Samuel 11 and 12 and his sin with Bathsheba. We talked about last week about how sometimes we may be through a sin, but the consequences of sin may still be there. And so we're going to look at chapters 13 through 15 and just see how David's family falls apart. In verses 1 through 5, we're introduced to two of David's children, one of which is Amnon and the other is Tamar. Now, Amnon and Tamar are step siblings. They had the same father, David of course, but two separate mothers. And we see here that in verses 1 through 5 that Amnon is obsessed with his stepsister in an unproductive way. And so he's just lovesick. The text there says that he literally makes himself physically sick. He is so infatuated with her. Anybody been like that before? Huh? Not with their sibling, no. Sorry. Whoa. You guys are disgusting. Mercy. Just in general. Just lovesick in general.
Yes.
No? Yes? A few of us have, right? You know. I was, right? So. I don't know if you were. She probably just settled. But anyways. But he's lovesick. The text literally says that he's just literally makes himself physically sick. Some of you may have been in that situation over a boy or over a girl, maybe in your youth or maybe not in your youth. But so he has a friend, and you've got to be extremely careful about the advice you listen to when it comes to your love life. Don't take dieting advice from people who are overweight. Okay? Don't take relationship advice from people who, can't keep somebody. You know what I'm saying? So I know of a situation one time where a girl found herself in a whole heap of trouble because she was listening to all of her friends who weren't Christians instead of the people in the congregation she should have been listening to. It's another illustration of the time. But we've got to be extremely careful who we take advice from. And so here in verses 16 through 19, Amnon rapes his stepsister Tamar, and a whole slew of events take place after that. Let's read verses 7 through 21. Verses 7 through 21 of chapter 13. Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down. And she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in the sight and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it before him, and he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send out everyone from among me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the chamber, that I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. But when she brought them near to him to eat, he took hold of her and said, "Come lie with me, my sister." And she answered him, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you'd be one of the most outrageous fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." But he would not listen to her. And being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with very great hatred. So the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he loved her. But Amnon said to her, "Get up and go." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus she was a virgin daughter of the king. So his servant put her outside the door and bolted it. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away crying aloud as she went. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you?" Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart. So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard all these things, he was very angry. And so Amnon is the firstborn son. He is the crown prince. Now in chapter 12, we learn that who has God chosen to be the next king of Israel? Solomon. Does the royal family know this? We're not for sure. The Bible tells us in chapter 12, but we don't know if God told the family in chapter 12. And so here Amnon is the crown prince. Everybody thinks he's going to be the next in line for the kingdom, and you see what type of person he is. Absalom is the third in line, he's the third son. He's the second in line, and you may ask, well, how could the third son be the second in line to the throne? How does that take place? What would cause that? I'm sorry, Brother Ed?
God's will to do so.
God's will? The first one wasn't dead. The second one was dead. Okay? Chileab was the second son, and he's never mentioned after his birth narrative or after we give him a list of sons. So most likely here, Amnon is first in line for the kingdom. Absalom is second in line for the kingdom. Okay? Now, being a second son of a king is good, but it's not as good as being the crown prince. And so there's already some tension here between Amnon and Absalom. Now, Tamar is whose sister? She's Amnon's half-sister. She's Absalom's what sister? Full sister, right? Same mom and dad. So Absalom takes this extremely personal, the fact that Amnon has violated his sister. And so David gets extremely upset as well. But we see David doesn't take matters into his hands, and he does not correct his son. And so Absalom starts to plot his revenge. And so he starts thinking about what he's going to do to extract this revenge on Amnon. And it takes years for this to take place. And so we see a couple of years later, in verses 28 through 32, Absalom finally takes the situation into his own hands. Let's read those passages together, verses 28 through 32. Then Absalom commanded his servants, "Mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear, I have commanded you. Be courageous and be valiant." So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. And while they were on their way, news came to David, "Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left." Then the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all the servants who were standing by tore their garments. But Jonadab, son of Shemaiah, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar." And so, was this just a fit of rage by Absalom? No. How long has he been planning this? 2 years, right? He's been waiting for the day. Now, it's interesting because before word gets back of what's taking place, they get the first word that Absalom has killed his brothers, right? Well, the first lesson is a lot of times the first thing that you hear about something is normally worse than it actually is, right? People like to over-embellish or over-exaggerate. But who is there in David's presence that knows exactly what took place? You guys are whispering. I know you know it. Just go ahead and say it. Jonadab, right? Who is Jonadab?
David's brother.
He's not David's brother. David's nephew. So that makes him what to Amnon and to Absalom? His first cousin, right? So it's obvious here that Absalom and Jonadab are in on this together, right? But do you remember earlier in the story I was telling you about taking advice from people? You remember that? Before Amnon rapes his sister, he's telling his first cousin just how lovesick he is. I mean, just how much he's infatuated. And the first cousin is the one who says, "Why don't you act like you're sick and tell your dad to send her over to your house with some food to help cheer you up?" Now, I wonder who that first cousin is. Jonadab. So it makes you wonder. Jonadab here tells Amnon, he doesn't tell him to rape his sister, but he does kind of give him an idea how to get her alone with him. But at the same time, he's Absalom's friend and is working the angle of killing him. Why do you think that is? The text doesn't say explicitly, but
To get on Absalom's good time.
yeah. If he's Absalom's friend and he knows that Amnon is number one in line to the throne, I mean, yeah, Absalom's going to have some money and some land, but he's not going to be king. So maybe Jonadab is 2 years prior working things in his head, trying to figure out how he can get Amnon off the throne for his good friend Absalom. The text doesn't explicitly say, so we can just speculate, but it is interesting to see him both in the beginning of the chapter trying to convince Amnon to be alone with his sister, then also at the end of the chapter, he knows exactly Absalom's plan when nobody else does except the servants who were in charge of killing his brother Amnon. So if he was in it from the beginning, should you be extremely careful who you take advice from? Even if they're family? Yeah, they may be working against you. I don't know. I was told from a very young age that be cautious of everyone, especially family. Now, I lived on a family farm, so what does that tell you? No comment. But yeah, you've got to be extremely, extremely careful about who we take advice from. Let's look at verses 37 through 39 to finish the chapter. Absalom fled and went to Talmud, the son of Ahimahud, king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. Now Absalom flees and goes to Geshur. Why would Absalom go to Geshur? Why would you go to a foreign country / kingdom? To hide out? But if you're going to go somewhere, you need to go somewhere you've got some connections, right? It just so happened that if you look right here, can you see that? Here you have David right here. David, and you have his two wives, or two of his wives, and you see the mother of both Absalom and Tamar. You see the mother of Amnon. Amnon's got an X right there because he's dead. Then you've got David's brother, his son, Jonadab, the first cousin. But who is the dad of, who's Absalom's granddad? Yeah, the king of Geshur. So he gets in trouble with dad because he killed his brother. Where does he go? He goes to granddad's house, right? When I was about 9 years old, I acted up in church. And my dad told me, church is over. You're going to get it. Which was not an uncommon occurrence in our house. I just couldn't keep still, or I couldn't shut up. Some of you might not. That may be a surprise to some of you. But I couldn't quit talking, and so I got in trouble a lot. And I remember being under the awning, right, with my grandmother out there. And I was just crying. I was holding her arm. It's like, Dad's going to whip me. My grandmother was like, don't whip him, Mark. He's just a boy. He's fine. And guess what? Didn't get a whipping either. Wasn't the first or last time I was saved by Grandma. So what does he do? He gets in trouble with Dad. He goes to Granddad's house, right? He's like, fine, I'll just go out here for a couple of years. How many years? 3 years. And we're going to see in the next chapter just how Absalom gets back to the kingdom. Let's look at verses 1 through 3. Oh, and here you have a little picture that shows where the land of Geshur would have been. You see where Jerusalem is right there, the city of David. And so he flees to the outer extents of David's control there to Geshur to get away from his dad or his brothers that might extract vengeance on him. And so here we get to chapter 14. And Joab has this plan of restoring Absalom back to the king. I mean, now that Amnon is dead, who is the heir to the throne? At least in their mind. Absalom. But your heir to the throne is banished in a foreign kingdom. And so Joab is thinking, we got to get this guy back. I mean, David, he's your heir. And so Joab starts working a plan. Let's look at verses 1 through 3. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. And Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. Go to the king and speak thus to him. So Joab put words in her mouth. So Joab goes to Tekoa, which is about 10 miles outside of Jerusalem. He gets a wise woman or an actress, depending on what translation you read, and he says, I need you to do a performance for me, okay? I want you to come into the king's court. I want you to act like you're mourning the death of someone very close to you, and you're going to repeat everything I say. And so she comes and she does exactly what Joab does. And she acts like she's mourning for her son, and basically almost like Nathan did with the sheep, right? And tried to get David to see it from a different angle, but the same situation. Joab tries to do the exact same thing. And so he's talking to him, and David finally concedes. Joab is not only the commander-in-chief of David's army, he is also his nephew. And so he thought it would be better if we would get Absalom back, because he's David's heir. And so he tells the woman to make up this story about how her son needs to be pardoned, because if she's killed, there will be no one left to take care of her, and she needs somebody to take care of her affairs. And so in verses 18 through 22, David understands what's going on. Let's go ahead and let's look at that passage right there in 18 verses 22. Then the king answered the woman, Do not hide from me anything that I ask of you. And the woman said, Let my lord the king speak. The king said, Is the hand of Joab with you in all this? The woman answered and said, As surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or the left from anything that my lord the king has said. It is your servant Joab who commanded me, and it was he who put these words in my mouth, the mouth of your servant. In order to change the course of these things, your servant Joab did this. But my lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of God to know all things that are on the earth. Then the king said to Joab, Behold, now I grant this. Go back and bring the young man Absalom. And Joab fell on his face and to the ground and paid homage and blessed the king. And Joab said, Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, and that the king has granted the request of his servant. And so Joab arose and went and got Absalom. And so Joab has this elaborate plan that he's going to get Absalom back to the kingdom by... Does the lady convince David? No, not really. Is David fooled? Is he tricked? Does he think this is a real situation? No. The text doesn't say it. But if David was able to hear this one story and realize, and he says, wait a minute, don't lie to me, okay? I'm the king. Don't lie. Joab put you up to this. You think Joab's been in David's ear for the last 3 years? Yeah. I mean, if he says, don't lie, Joab's the one who's got you telling this fake, made-up story just so I'll bring Absalom back. Does it work? Yeah, he did. So he concedes. So David concedes, and Joab goes, and he gets him. And he brings him back. And so Absalom comes back, but unfortunately, he's basically just under house arrest. Let's go ahead and read through verse 33 and pick up where we left off. Verse 25, And now all of Israel, there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut his hair on his head, for the end of every year he used to cut it when it was heavy on him, he weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. And there were born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 beautiful daughter, whose name was Tamar, and she was beautiful. So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming into the king's presence. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send to the king, but Joab would not come to him. And a second time, but Joab would not come. Then he said to his servant, See, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. And then Joab arose and went to Absalom at the house and said to him, Why have your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered Joab, Because I sent word to you, Come here, that I may send you to the king, to ask, Why have I come from Geshur? It had been better for me to still be there. Now therefore let me go to the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. And then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king blessed Absalom. And so Absalom comes back. Is Absalom a good-looking guy? He's the best-looking guy. I mean, he has the best feet in all the nation. He's got the best shins of everybody in the nation. He's got the best abs. I mean, he can do the splits like Jean-Claude Van Damme. He's got the best hair. He's got, an actor's chin, right? Some people call it a butt chin. I call it an actor's chin, like Kirk Douglas. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah, maybe because I have one. I don't know. Anyways, he's got the best hair. Every year he cuts his hair and it's 5 pounds. He's just the best looking guy. And so maybe there's some resentment there. Who knows? But he comes back. Does he get to have an audience with his father, the king? Not initially. How long does he have to wait to see his dad? 2 years, right? He's been in exile for how long? 3. He's been in house arrest for how long? 2. It's been 5 years since he's seen his dad. I mean, this is not a healthy relationship. I mean, this is, and from their viewpoint, this is the next king of Israel. He's the heir. And he ain't spoken to the current king, his dad, in 5 years. And so he's trying to get word to Joab to go tell his dad and say, look, if I'm guilty, then you need to kill me or I'll go back to exile. But this is getting ridiculous. And so he sends for Joab. Does Joab come the first time? No. Does Joab come the second time? So what's his bright idea? Yeah. He tells his servants, you see across the fence row over there, Joab's wheat? Just go burn it real quick. And so what do? Yeah. So the next time somebody doesn't answer your phone calls, you know what to do, right? Look, officer, it was biblical, okay? It's right there in the Bible. So Joab comes like, you idiot, what are you doing? Like, why'd you set my field on fire? He's like, I tried to call you, you never answered my calls. Like, you never came back. And so finally he goes to the king. Does David accept him? Yes. He does. But what does he make Absalom do? He makes him bow to the ground and pay homage in humility. Is this the way the loving father welcomes the wayward son in Luke 15? No. Did that father make his son grovel and beg for forgiveness? No. Absalom comes back and he grovels, he falls down, he pays homage, he kisses the king's feet, but he's been burned for the last 5 years and he's going to get his vengeance. Just goes to show you that when you have bad relationships, just how they come back to be a burden. David should have, now David didn't have the benefit of reading Luke 15 like you and I did, but David should have had a more active role in reaching out to his son. And so let's look at chapter 15 to see just how that should have taken, what's going to take place because of just how Absalom has been hurt by his dad. Verses 1 through 6. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horse and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king of judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And he said, "Your servant is such and such a tribe of Israel." And Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you." Then Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were a judge in the land, that every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice." And wherever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And we're told that he does this for about 4 years. And so this takes place between 980 and 976. This would have been the time where David was kind of near the end of his life. He's trying to build palaces. He's trying to gather up the supplies to build the temple. David is so consumed with building projects at this time that these people who were coming to receive judgments feel like no one is there to hear their case, which was the job of who? The king, right? And so here you have Absalom. He goes to the city gate. And what does he do? Yeah. Is he concerned about the people? No.
He's trying to gain favor with people.
Yeah.
Because he wants to be.
It's an ulterior motive, right? I mean, there are politicians that really care about the people. Danny Bingham, right? Then there are those who don't, okay? And so you have here Absalom and notice the difference. I mean, the Bible tries to show the irony here. When the son of the king goes to David, he has to bow down and pay homage. When the people bow down to the heir of the nation, what does he do? Yeah, he picks them up, right? He picks him up, he gives him a kiss. He's like, hey guys, I wish I was a judge. If the king could make me a judge, I would give you justice. I mean, only if somebody would give me some power, I'd make sure I would right the wrongs. I'd be on your side. I'm a man of the people. And so Absalom's not concerned about the people, but he's concerned about kind of garnering this type of, this power behind him. And David has to flee Jerusalem because Absalom launches his attack. He goes into full swing. Let's look at verses 10 through 15. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, and say, Absalom is king in Hebron. With Absalom, with 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went with their innocence, knew nothing. And while Absalom was offering sacrifices, he set out for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor from the city of Goliath. And the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. And a messenger came to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. Then David said to all of his servants who were with him in Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or else there will be no way of escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us, and the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said to the king, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever the Lord the king decides. And so Absalom goes to what city to kind of launch his attack? Hebron. Why would he have gone to Hebron? I'm sorry, Steve, was that you? The ark wouldn't have been there. The ark was already in Jerusalem at this time, most likely. It's a little fuzzy because the Bible doesn't say exactly when that took place, but it probably would have already, it's definitely already in Jerusalem because as David flees, they take the ark with him in the next few verses. So the ark wasn't there. I'm sorry? That's right. When David was anointed king, he spent the first how many years of his reign in Hebron? The first 7 years, right? Also, where was the first, 8 or 9 sons born to David? 7, I think. Where were the first 7 sons born? Hebron. All right, which one was Absalom? Where's his hometown? Hebron. And so he goes back to his hometown. So there's some, he probably can garner some support from the people there because, who doesn't want their guy to be king, right? And so he goes to Hebron where he was born. Maybe it's symbolic. That's where David started his kingdom from. Maybe the people in Hebron were upset that David had moved the kingdom from Hebron, where he had been for 7 years, to Jerusalem. I mean, we don't think about it this way because we're not used to stuff like that, but think about the economic change in a town. I was reading the Tennessee Magazine. Anybody read the magazine the co-op puts out? The little history sections? Pretty good stuff. They were talking about the 17 different times that a county capital has been moved in Tennessee. And it mentioned different counties. And most of the counties that have capitals moved from one place to another, you've never even heard of these places. Some of them don't even exist anymore. They're unincorporated. They're just in the middle of somebody's field. When somebody moves a capital somewhere, it changes the economic status completely. I'm from just outside of Clarksville, which was called Port Royal back in the 1700s and early 1800s. Nashville beat out Port Royal to be the state capital by 1 vote or a couple of votes, depending on who you read. Port Royal, up until recently, was nothing but a spot on the Red River. Like nothing. You had Clarksville 10 miles away, and you had Springfield about 15 miles away. But that once main center of trade for Tennessee, for the Cumberland Gap in the late 1700s, nothing. It's a state park now. What is Nashville? One of the fastest growing metropolitan cities in the United States. Does a capital make an economic difference? Absolutely. They may have been upset with David for moving the capital from Hebron to Jerusalem. I mean, that cost some people some money. I mean, what's the 3 things in real estate, Rob? Location. Absolutely. Right? Makes a difference. And so maybe it was location. Where is Hebron in relation to the nation of Israel, the territory? Is it in the middle or on the edge? It's kind of on the edge, right? It's on the south side. So he doesn't have to worry about being attacked from multiple fronts, just the north. And so there's several reasons as to why he may have went to Hebron. And so he flees there. He goes to attack his father, but his father flees. And so it's interesting here in verse 23 that as David is leaving Jerusalem, he crosses the Kidron Valley and he goes up to the Mount of Olives. And as he's on the Mount of Olives, he looks back to Jerusalem. And it's there where he tells the priest to go back into the city and take the Ark of the Covenant back into Jerusalem. Is there anybody else in the biblical narrative that crosses the Kidron Valley over the Mount of Olives? Jesus, yeah. Just as David had been kind of kicked out of Jerusalem by his son, when Jesus was kind of kicked out of Jerusalem by the Pharisees and the people, he crosses the Kidron Valley and he goes up on the Mount of Olives and he looks down into the city where he's about to be crucified and put on trial. The symbolism there is really strong, really interesting. Let's look at verses 25 through 26. And let's look at David's demeanor through this difficult time. 25, the king said to Zodok, "Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I have found favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and its dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, I am here. Let him do to me what seems good to him." So as they're fleeing Jerusalem, what does David say? "Priests, get this and follow me." What do they bring? The ark. He gets up on the Mount of Olives and he stops as he's looking back to the city. And what does he tell the priest? Take it back, right? He says, if God wants me to go back to Jerusalem, I'll go back to Jerusalem and I'll see it again. But if God wants me to be defeated, if God wants Absalom to be the king, then the Ark of the Covenant's not going to do anything for me, right? And so even though David is in kind of this moment of despair, who does he still kind of tip his cap as to who's really in control? God, right? He recognizes in the midst of his trials that God is in control. Now, does David sit down on the Mount of Olives and pout and say, we're just going to leave this up to God, and we're just going to let God decide what he's going to do? No. Let's look at verses 27 through 29, and then we'll read verses 32 through 37 to close ourselves out. The king also said to Zodok the priest, "Are you not a seer? Go back into the city in peace with your two sons, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So Zodok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. Verse 32. While David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai the Archite came and met him with his coat torn and dirt on his head. And David said to him, "If you go on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so now I will be your servant. And you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. Are not Zodok and Abiathar priests with you there? So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to Zodok and Abiathar the priest. And behold, the two sons are with them there, Ahimaaz and Zodok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, and by them you shall send to me everything you hear." So Hushai, David's friend, came to the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. And so as David is leaving, he does something. He sends spies back into the city. Now you're going to see in chapters 15 through 19 that when David flees the city, David is going to be in red. And so you see the track that David takes as he flees Jerusalem and goes all the way up to the northern end of the kingdom. And there you see the green, which is where Absalom takes his forces from Hebron. He captures Jerusalem, and then we're going to see the battle that ensues up on the northern side of the kingdom. But Absalom takes the city, but David sends spies back in. So does David say, you know what, we're just going to let God handle this and I'm not going to do anything? Is that what he does? What's that? Well, he says we're going to let God be in control, but does he do anything himself? Yeah, he sends the spies in, right? He's scheming. He goes and tries to set up a fort. He recruits men. He starts getting ready for a battle. And so whenever you and I are in the midst of trials, or even our Christian life, is it okay to just sit down and say, you know what? God's in control. He can do whatever he wants? No. Is God in control? Yes. Is his will going to be done? Yes. Do you have to get up and go to work? Yes. In fact, that's the exact words of Paul in 1 and 2 Thessalonians. Get up and go to work, right? We still have work to do spiritually. We can't just say, well, that person's going to be a Christian. God will work it out with him. No, we've got to go to work. We've got to work out our own salvation, and we've got to be able to teach others about Christ. And so just as David was confident in God's will, he was also going to get up and go to work. You've all heard that illustration that you've all heard in sermons where there's a flood and a guy's in his house and the police come by and like, there's a flood, get in the car. He's like, no, I'm going to wait for God. And then the floodwaters rise up and he's on the second floor and a boat comes by and like, you got to get in. He's like, no, I'm going to wait for God. And then he gets up on the roof and a helicopter comes like, dude, you're going to die. Get in the helicopter. He's like, no, I'm a Christian. God's going to figure it out for me. And he gets to heaven and he says, God, I'm upset with you because, I knew you were going to take care of me and I waited for you. He's like, I sent the police, I sent a boat, and I sent a helicopter. What else did you want? Sometimes you got to get up and get in. And so David was confident in God's will, but he was also going to jump in the boat if the boat came. We're running low on time, but are there any questions or comments? Things from the text that we didn't cover?
So was Absalom, I guess he killed his brother, but wasn't that due justice under the whole law for the rape of his sister?
Yes. No, under Leviticus 20:17, Absalom was completely justified in killing Amnon, his brother. He did not sin in killing him, according to the old law.
David didn't allow that sentence to be carried out. He sort of covered it up and then mad at Absalom for doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting that was David guilty of death under the old law?
I mean, David should have been killed before this under the old law.
Exactly. And so was Absalom was justified in his killing of Amnon, which is important. I appreciate you bringing that out. And so was David mad because Absalom transgressed the law? No, David was mad because Absalom killed the heir. Right? If David had a backbone, he should have been the one doing something about it. That's not Isaac's opinion. If you remember back to the first chapter we read, what did the Bible say? David was very angry, but what does the text say? He did nothing. He was the king. Kings are in charge of executing justice in their domain. So,
I wonder if you didn't feel, like you didn't have the word, but like you're just as guilty as the person who would be carrying the justice out of you.
yeah.
Was this after the cities of refuge, and you had to go there even if they were innocent or not, because the kinfolk had reason okay if you could kill them.
Yeah, this was after the cities of refuge. Mm-hmm. So good comments. Yeah, it'd be kind of hard for David to kill his own son, right, for unlawful sexual activity when he himself had also been guilty of that himself. So it was.
Was there some kind of stipulation too that if a woman was claiming to have been raped, that she had to have cried out and made someone hear her, or they would be adultery or something?
Well, if you notice in the text when it takes place, what does Tamar say? Before the rape, she says, just ask Dad for us to get married. He's not going to say no. And then after the rape, under the old law, he should have married Tamar. And that's why when he goes to send her away, she's like, why are you going to send me away? This is worse than the first hand. And you're thinking, well, how could that be worse than the first hand? Well, because if he didn't marry her, nobody else would. And so he was basically subjugating her to a life of barrenness and loneliness.
If Jerry Springer had been around back then, he would have had one.
They'd have never run out of material, huh?
He would have to make up the...
That's right. That's right. Great comments. Great comments. Well, thank you so much. Next week we're going to be looking at chapter 16 through 18, if you'd like to read ahead, and we're going to talk about the civil war that takes place between father and son. Thank you so much for your questions, your comments, and your presence. Let's end with a prayer. Dear God, thank you so much for your word and your wisdom and for the instruction that it imparts. Dear Heavenly Father, please help us to always follow your word. Dear Heavenly Father, we know that if we follow your will, that we will rid ourselves of much of the heartaches that are talked about in this passage. Help us to be faithful. And if we do find ourselves to be unfaithful in some sort of way, to turn to you and seek your guidance and your help to correct those things and not take matters into our own hands. We're so thankful for your Son, Jesus, and the salvation and forgiveness that he offers. In his name we pray. Amen.